What's happening now is that many are using these same set of sound bites to try to make the argument that, see how racist the Western media is? But this isn't a trend in the media. But hey, it is a great narrative. So it leads to this op-ed in the Washington Post entitled, "Opinion: Coverage of Ukraine has exposed long-standing racist biases in Western media." The editorial by Cambridge University fellow H.A. Hellyer seemed to suggest that it's racist to view this war as different, as more dangerous. Quote, "The implication for anyone reading or watching, particularly anyone with ties to a nation that has also seen foreign intervention, conflict, sanctions, and mass migration is clear. It's much worse when white Europeans suffer than when it's Arabs or other non-white people. Yemenis, Iraqis, Nigerians, Libyans, Afghans, Palestinians, Syrians, Hondurans, well, they're used to it." It's not about white Europeans under attack. It's about Europeans, period. Democracy is under attack. It's not racist to point out that this war is a game changer for our strategic allies. This is the most significant geopolitical event in modern history. Vladimir Putin has nuclear weapons and now appears unstable enough that there are serious concerns that if provoked, he could do something insane that can have global consequences beyond Europe. That's reality. Now, that is not a denial that racism exists. The masses of stranded people of color fleeing Ukraine and getting stuck at the border while white Ukrainians are let through is truly disturbing. We can condemn that while acknowledging that this war is different and much more significant to and perilous for the United States and Europe. That is why there is so much more Western media coverage. Joining me now to discuss is Mahdiz Keshavaz, a board member with the Arab and Middle East Journalists Association. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. So what do you think I'm missing here?
Well, I think there's a couple things, Dan. I think beginning with the reason that Amija felt compelled to issue the statement in the first place, and that wasn't in any way to take away from the significance of the story. We are truly facing a historic moment that has put the globe at risk. We recognize that 100% and stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people and their suffering. What we are doing with this statement is pointing out that these stories can be told journalistically, and that as media, in the media sphere and as journalists, that it is our duty to raise the bar and how these stories are being told. And so in the lead up to this, you were talking a bit about how we're implying that we're capitalizing on a trend and that this isn't a moment, this is a moment that we're trying to insert racism into the conversation. This isn't something that we see as a trend. This is something that we at Amija see as a practice that journalists keep relying on in order to rely on tropes to tell stories. And it doesn't serve the public in terms of informing them, and it doesn't serve us as journalists to do our job properly.
So, but what are the tropes? Putting aside the couple of people who made comments that they shouldn't have made, and I criticized them, what are the broad tropes that you're talking about when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the amount of coverage, the kind of comments, and again, I'm not saying that you made this, but the kinds of comments that some are making suggesting that, oh, the media, this shows the media doesn't care about what happens in these other areas. How does any of that fit into what we're actually seeing?
Well, I think one way of looking at this is to look at how over the past, let's even go back 20 or 30 years of coverage and what's happened in terms of wars. One, we're ignoring the fact that Yugoslavia and its division were just in the early 90s. So that wasn't too far apart from the invasion of Iraq, the initial invasion. And we covered those issues quite differently. And I think we have seen again and again that there's a reliance on comparing economic factors of the individuals that we perceive are leaving Ukraine. And it overlooks the fact of what actually it takes for any refugee anywhere to be able to leave their country, the amount of money it takes, the amount of resources that are required, and how many people get left behind. That is as true in the Ukraine as it is in Afghanistan or elsewhere. And so I think when we rely on comparing it to Middle Eastern imagery and things that we have seen over the course of time and then being shocked at that, it undermines and dehumanizes the experiences of the people that we have been charged with covering.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, except when you mention, you mentioned Yugoslavia, you mentioned Afghanistan. They simply don't pose the existential threat that Putin does. Now, I understand your point is when it comes to individual storytelling about people who are fleeing, okay. I'll concede that when it comes to journalists telling individual stories, there could be an evaluation of how they're told. But it just seems to me that this is more broadly an effort to try to raise awareness about an issue, and we're talking about it, in the context of something where it simply doesn't fit. That this is so different from Yugoslavia, so different from Afghanistan, that to even make that comparison undermines your argument, no?
Well, I think we're having a different kind of conversation in here, too, and with all due respect, Dan. I think on the one end, we recognize, and there's no question, I mean, it would be foolish in my mind to contest what's happening in the Ukraine in terms of geopolitics and Putin's arsenal of weaponry and what that means for the region and if not the globe. There's no question about that. I think our point has been and remains is that we can tell this story and to contextualize this moment in history in a way that doesn't take away from the ongoing experiences of people who are elsewhere and people who have been on this same exact border and are having quite different experiences for years now. And I think that those are two separate stories, and we would be remiss to conflate the two and to rely on the experiences and the tropes of the Middle East or North Africans in order to tell the story of what's happening in the Ukraine. And it takes away from the situation that Ukrainians are facing.
So do you disagree then with H.A. Hellier, who wrote that piece in the Washington Post, where she basically said that, the implication for anyone reading or watching is that it's much worse when white Europeans suffer than when it's Arabs or other non-white people. They're used to it. I mean, again, her whole argument seemed to be based on the fact that there's just too much concern about this, that the concern is overwrought, and the only reason that's happening is because they're white people.
Well, I don't know her, so I can't speak for her intentions behind that piece, but I can say that I understand what it feels like, and I think many, many people of color understand intimately what it feels like to see people who look like you and who could look like your neighbors or your family members be in situations of dire danger and distress. That is not something that is in any way foreign to any people of color, I think, in most any region. I think what we're trying to say here, and maybe what many of those articles are trying to say, is that we need to raise the bar of how we see humanity, and we need to see one another as equal so that it is as egregious to see Afghans as it is to see Ukrainians, and separate that political moment and rely on the humanity and understand that everyone has a right to flee safety, to flee danger, to access safety across those borders. And you say that it's disturbing to see Africans or Indians and others not be able to cross that border. It's also a violation of international law, and as journalists, we're remiss to not point that out.
But that has been a story that's been covered. I mean, it just seems to me that a lot of what you're laying out is a utopian world, right, where all human rights abuses are equal. It doesn't matter where it happens. It's equal. And the reality is, of course, in the real world, it simply can't be based on geopolitical. I'll give you the final word.
Well, I think it's easy to say that, it's a utopian idea, but it's not a utopian idea to say that people have a right to leave conflict and to be able to access safety for themselves and their families. I mean, I think that that's really the fundamental line that we are taking here. And I think we see those images, and it's problematic for the world. And it's as problematic to see Ukrainians as it is to see Afghans or Syrians or anyone else.
Makdiz Keshavaz, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.